Welcome to the Science Experience podcast, where we explore the latest and most exciting papers and preprints in science.
Before we jump into the data, do us a huge favor, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends and family. It really supports the Science Experience and helps us bring you these breakthroughs.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Every textbook you've ever read probably says that aging is just, random wear and tear, right? Like rust on a car.
Oh, yeah, the classic rust analogy, just happening wherever.
Exactly. But this massive new paper just proved that your DNA is actually sacrificing parts of your body on purpose, just to keep you alive.
Yeah.
We're looking at a 2026 study by Szilard and colleagues titled, "The Aging Genome Exhibits Organized Vulnerability to Somatic Mutations."
It's completely wild. It totally dismantles this core assumption that biology has held onto for, literally decades.
This is Leo Szilard, right? Back in 1959.
Yeah, Szilard was a physicist and biologist, and he gave us this dominant theory of aging. He argued that somatic mutations, which are just the genetic typos that build up in our non-reproductive cells over time, he said they accumulate randomly.
Like the genome is just this passive victim of time. You just fill up this biological mutation bucket randomly, and then boom, when it finally overflows, your tissues fail. You age.
Right, but this new research looked at an unbelievable volume of data to prove that wrong. They looked at 1.3 million somatic mutations across more than 4,000 cells.
Wow.
Yeah, taken from 13 different human tissues. And they found out the genome is not just passively rusting, it operates like a highly strategic defense system.
It actively shields its most critical genes, right? And then just deliberately throws its peripheral, less important genes right under the bus.
Exactly. The cell essentially builds a VIP protection list. The resources required to fix every single genetic typo would be astronomical. It's just not possible.
So triage.
Yep. It creates an organized vulnerability. It pours all its maintenance energy into specific components while ignoring others.
Which means our mission for this deep dive today, for you listening, is to figure out how an unintelligent blob of cellular machinery builds this VIP list. We need to understand what makes a gene worthy of protection and why this changes basically everything about how we might eventually treat aging.
To do that, we have to look at exactly what is taking damage across these 13 tissues.
Right. So how did they even figure out what's on the VIP list?
Well, the researchers had to start by normalizing the data for gene length, because a longer string of DNA naturally presents a bigger target for mutations, just by pure statistical chance,
That makes sense. A bigger target gets hit more.
Right. So they built a mathematical model to predict the baseline number of mutations any given gene should have, assuming the old random rust theory was actually true.
And when they mapped the real-world data against that random baseline, the divide was staggering. Out of over 18,000 protein-coding genes, there are 727 genes sitting on that VIP list.
They are what we call hypo-mutated, meaning they carry a tiny, tiny fraction of the mutations they theoretically should.
And on the flip side, there's a cluster of 12,253 hyper-mutated genes that act as absolute punching bags. Like they take far more hits than random chance would ever dictate.
The contrast between those two groups tells us exactly what the cell values. Look at a gene called USP9Y.
Okay, what does that do?
It codes for an enzyme responsible for recycling proteins, so a core piece of cellular infrastructure. That gene only carries 2.1% of the mutations you would expect it to have.
2.1%, that's nothing.
The cell keeps it virtually pristine. But then you look at IFNL2, which is an antiviral signaling gene that responds to external threats at epithelial barriers. That one takes 31 times more hits than expected.
Okay, wait, I want to focus on that for a second. An antiviral gene sounds pretty important to me. Why would the cell let it get hammered with mutations?
What's fascinating here is that it represents an adaptive function rather than a constitutive one. When they zoomed out to look at entire biological pathways, this pattern scaled up perfectly.
So adaptive pathways, things like sensory perception, olfactory receptors for smell, keratins for your hair and skin, those are the mutation dumping grounds.
Yeah, the cell can afford for those to be a little messy. The pathways that are fiercely protected are the essential, continuously required processes.
Right, processes like snRNP assembly, which handles RNA splicing. Because if a cell loses its ability to process its own genetic instructions, it dies immediately.
Exactly. So that pathway is completely locked down. And it's the exact same story with the genes associated with macroautophagy, the cell's waste clearance system, and crucially, mitochondrial function.
The genes that keep our cellular power plants running are heavily shielded, because that energy production involves a massive, highly coordinated system, right? The electron transport chain.
Oh, yeah, it's incredibly complex.
We're talking about intricately linked protein complexes. Complex 1, complex 2, complex 3, complex 4, and complex 5.
And all of those complexes have to function in continuous harmony to execute oxidative phosphorylation, or OXPHOS.
OXPHOS, right?
Yeah, OXPHOS is the fundamental process that generates the ATP keeping us alive. A random mutation anywhere in the genes controlling OXPHOS, or in complex 1 through complex 5, doesn't just cause a slight drop in energy. The cell starves.
Let's conceptualize this. Is the genome like a sinking naval ship in the middle of a battle?
Yeah.
The engine room deep inside the hull represents the mitochondria, the snRNP assembly, the OXPHOS machinery.
I like that.
The military is going to reinforce that engine room with feet of solid steel armor, right? Because if the engines die, the ship sinks. But the observation deck up top, the sensory genes, the immune signaling, they just leave that exposed to the elements.
Yeah, it's not that the observation deck doesn't matter, it's that the ship only has so much steel. If the deck takes a hit, it's bad, but the ship still floats. The cell is making a brutal calculation about resource allocation. Constitutive infrastructure cannot be allowed to fail.
So as a single skin cell mutating a keratin gene might result in a slightly misshapen protein,
Yeah.
but your skin as a whole organ will keep functioning. You survive the hit to the observation deck. Okay, so the cell treats the mitochondria like the engine room and protects it, but the cell doesn't have a brain. How does it physically pull this off? How does it project a force field around complex 1, but let the olfactory receptors take the damage?
Right, it seems like magic, but the paper reveals the mechanism actually comes down to transcription. It's simply how often a gene is read.
Just reading the gene.
Yeah, scientists have argued about this specific mechanism for years. Does reading a gene protect it, or does reading a gene expose it to damage?
And who was right?
Well, this massive data set finally proves both sides were looking at different parts of the same curve. The relationship between how heavily a cell expresses a gene and its mutation burden forms a U-shape.
Okay, so let's look at the bottom of that U-shape first.
Yeah.
The moderate expression range. The genes in this sweet spot are incredibly pristine, right? They have the lowest mutation rates.
Yeah, and that cleanliness is driven by a mechanism called transcription-coupled repair, or TCR. As the molecular machinery physically moves down the DNA strand to read a moderately expressed gene, it acts like a patrol car.
Scanning for problems.
Exactly. When it hits a typo or a physical lesion in the DNA, it stalls. That stalling physically triggers an alarm, summoning specialized DNA repair crews to fix the error on the spot.
So the very act of reading the gene is what summons the maintenance crew.
Yep.
Wait, if reading a gene summons the repair crew, shouldn't the most read genes be the most pristine? I mean, I'm stuck on this U-shape.
It's a great question.
If you're reading it constantly, the repair crew should always be there, but the right side of the U-shape spikes way up. The absolute most heavily expressed genes are actually the most damaged. That breaks the logic of the repair system. Why doesn't the repair crew just fix it?
Because the repair system gets completely overwhelmed by its own machinery. At extreme levels of transcription, the protective mechanism collapses because the reading process itself becomes a physical weapon against the DNA.
Ah, okay. So to build on your patrol car idea, it's like a city highway system. If a highway has steady, moderate traffic, the trucks drive over it, spot a pothole, and call the road crews. The highway stays smooth. But it's severe bumper-to-bumper rush hour. The sheer volume of heavy cars starts ripping up the asphalt. They cause accidents, block the lanes, and the repair trucks physically cannot get through the traffic jam to fix the potholes. The massive volume of cars rips up the asphalt faster than the crews can possibly patch it.
That translates perfectly to the cellular level. To read a gene constantly, the DNA has to be continuously unspooled and held open. It's a state called open chromatin.
So it's physically exposed.
Yeah. The raw DNA is left exposed to chemical damage in the cellular environment, and on top of that, you get those molecular traffic jams. The machinery trying to read the DNA actually crashes into the machinery trying to replicate the DNA.
Oh, wow, they literally collide.
Yes, and these collisions cause unstable structures called R-loops, which are basically just dangerous tangles of RNA and DNA that physically break the strand.
So the extreme demand we place on our most vital genes is what ultimately destroys them.
The cellular infrastructure we rely on the most is caught in an unwinnable tug of war. The intense demand keeps the repair crews working constantly, but the sheer volume of traffic causes structural damage they just can't keep up with.
And over decades, this extreme high end of expression is where the system frays. This is the breaking point for aging.
Exactly.
So physical expression levels act as this mechanical shield or a weapon, depending on the volume. But the paper uncovers a second invisible force shaping this landscape, right? It involves the evolutionary architecture of the cell, specifically the protein-protein interaction network, or the PPI.
Yeah, the PPI network maps out how every protein in the cell physically connects and works with other proteins. And the architecture is highly unequal.
Meaning some are way more connected than others.
Right. Most proteins might only interact with one or two others. They sit on the periphery. But a few proteins act as massive central hubs, interacting with dozens or hundreds of different pathways.
We were talking about hub genes like ESR2, which is an estrogen receptor, or TP53, the famous tumor suppressor gene. The data clearly shows these highly connected hubs have far fewer mutations, while the peripheral genes form these isolated, hyper-mutated clusters.
And the researchers measured how evolution filters out damage in these hubs using what's called the DNDS ratio. This is a metric for observing evolutionary purifying selection in action.
To understand that ratio, we need to clarify how mutations actually work for a second. There are two main types, right?
Right.
Synonymous mutations change a letter in the DNA code, but they don't change the final protein. It's like misspelling a word in a way that sounds exactly the same. The machine still works. But non-synonymous mutations alter the physical structure of the protein. They break the machine.
And purifying selection is the ongoing filtration system for those machine-breaking mutations. If a non-synonymous mutation hits a central hub like TP53, the consequences for that individual cell are catastrophic.
It just crashes.
Totally. The cell will likely undergo apoptosis. It will trigger its own death, or it will simply stop dividing. That broken hub is purged from the tissue completely. But if a breaking mutation hits a peripheral gene on the edge of the network, the cell can limp along. It survives, continues dividing, and we eventually sequence it in the lab.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Does the cell actively know a gene is a vital network hub? Or wait, is this whole network protection thing just survivor bias? If a hub breaks, the cell dies, so it vanishes from the data entirely. We only end up sequencing the cells that survived, which just happen to be the ones with broken peripheral genes.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, survivor bias actually does the heavy lifting here. The researchers broke down the math using linear models to figure out what was actually driving the protection.
Okay, what were the numbers?
The physical expression level of a gene, the transcription we just talked about, that explains roughly 16% of the variance in mutation burden. Purifying selection, that grim reaper effect of bad mutations killing the cell, explains 4.2%.
And the physical network degree, the actual number of connections a hub has, that only adds 0.4% to the model. They ran the numbers, and the network itself basically offers zero physical protection, less than 0.5%.
Yeah, we were giving the network credit for an illusion. Network hubs are protected simply because they tend to be moderately expressed, triggering transcription-coupled repair, and because if they do happen to break, the cell dies and takes the evidence with it. The network architecture is mostly just a downstream consequence of transcription and selection.
This is all deeply compelling. But we are looking at observational data from human tissues. And in science, observation has a massive vulnerability, which is environmental noise.
Right.
How do the researchers know this isn't just an illusion caused by where these cells live? I mean, a liver cell is exposed to radically different toxins and stressors than a brain cell. Technical noise is an issue too. Some genes are harder to sequence, making it look like they have fewer mutations simply because the sequencing machine missed them.
They knew that, so they needed to eliminate every single variable. They designed an acid test. They took primary human fetal lung fibroblasts, which are structural cells grown in a sterile, perfectly controlled petri dish.
The cell line called IMR90, right?
Exactly, IMR90. Instead of letting them age naturally over decades, they forcefully accelerated the mutation process using a chemical called ENU.
So ENU is basically a biological wrecking ball. It's a highly toxic chemical mutagen. They blasted these cells with it for 9 consecutive cycles. They practically nukes the genome in a vacuum.
Yeah, totally eliminated the noise. Every cell gets the exact same exposure. Every cell gets sequenced to the exact same depth. There is no environmental variance, no varying tissue lifespans, just raw forced mutation.
So what does this all mean? Did the patterns hold up?
Under that extreme chemical trauma, the patterns held up perfectly.
Wow. The U-shaped expression curve was still there.
Yep, the apparent protection of the network hubs was preserved. The exact same hyper-mutated sensory pathways were destroyed, and the hypo-mutated repair pathways survived.
That proves the vulnerability is hard-coded into the genome's architecture. It operates completely independently of whether a cell is sitting in your brain, filtering blood in your liver, or getting blasted by toxic chemicals in a plastic dish.
It is a universal intrinsic protocol for cellular survival, not a tissue artifact. Bringing this all together fundamentally shifts our perspective on aging. Since 1959, we assumed aging was about the total volume of damage filling up that mutation bucket.
Right.
But this data shows us that organismal decline is entirely about where the mutations fall.
The genome is fighting a highly organized strategic retreat. It sacrifices the peripheral modules, the specialized tissue functions, the sensory receptors, all to buy time for the core infrastructure. It protects the engine room to the bitter end.
Yeah, it keeps the splicing machinery running, it protects the macroautophagy pathways, and it desperately guards the mitochondria.
Which forces us to ask a really profound question about the future of medicine. If aging is driven by the eventual catastrophic failure of these highly protected VIP modules, what does that mean for how we design anti-aging therapeutics?
Currently, so much of longevity research focuses on global solutions. People look for ways to reduce oxidative stress across the entire body, or they search for generic DNA repair enzymes to suppress mutations across the entire genome.
But if the peripheral genome is literally designed to take hits and survive, a global intervention might be a massive misallocation of resources. We shouldn't be trying to armor the observation deck.
Exactly.
We need to figure out how to reinforce the armor, specifically around the engine room. What if future anti-aging therapies ignore the vast majority of the genome and instead use targeted interventions that specifically support the repair mechanisms of those critical hubs?
Just zero in on the vitals.
Yeah, what if we just figure out how to give complex 1, complex 2, complex 3, complex 4, complex 5, and the OXPHOS machinery a little extra structural support so they can survive the damage of extreme transcription?
It changes the target entirely. We stop fighting the random rust on the entire car, and we focus strictly on maintaining the core network hubs that dictate whether the cell lives or dies.
It transforms longevity from a generalized battle against time into a highly precise mechanical problem. It gives us an entirely new lens to look at our own biology. We aren't just passive victims of cellular wear and tear. The genome is a strategist.
Please remember to like and subscribe, and thank you for tuning into the Science Experience.